Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this newest episode of um, the Press Box here in December. We appreciate everybody joining the call today. We are going to give it a minute here to let everybody who is logging on get into the call. So while we wait for everybody to join, we'll just do some quick housekeeping items. My name is Don Vincent. I am the publisher of the Daily Line. I'll be handing it over to Alex and the rest of the panel today here in just a moment. But while we wait, give these folks a minute to join. Just kind of want to let you guys know about some things that are happening around the Daily Line. Right now we are fielding our fourth quarter Chicago Index survey. That is our collaboration with Crane Chicago Business. We are, like I said, in our fourth quarter doing this survey. That is basically a citizen sentiment survey about government policy and our elected officials. So if you haven't participated in the Chicago Index yet, I'm going to be sharing a link here shortly that can direct you there. So please take some time to, it takes about 9 minutes to complete the survey. It's for both residents of Chicago and the Cook County area. So please participate if you have not done so yet this quarter. This is going to be an ongoing study through the 2023 elections. So please be on the lookout for the Chicago Index notifications from the Daily Line, and of course, Cranes will be doing that as well. You can also sign up, so just to kind of stay involved at thechicagoindex.com. On another note, we relaunched our Clout Wiki under a new name called the Clout Files. So if you haven't checked this out, please do. We've launched about 105 profiles right now on our elected officials. We have all 50 aldermen, a bunch of departments, and a variety of other really great content. So if you haven't checked that out, please do so. I'll share a link in our chat window here shortly to that as well. Pretty cool. Pretty cool bit of content. It enables you to also interact with us a little bit. So if you have something that you want to share about an alderman or a department or something that's going on in the city, there's a box at the bottom that you can leave some feedback there as well. So please participate. And you should also be seeing a lot of in our coming stories, we'll be linking to these profiles as well. So this will be kind of something that is continuously growing and becoming more informative as we go. So we're starting to get a whole bunch of people on here, Alex, and I don't want to waste any more time. So why don't I just kick it off to you, and we can start talking about the remap.
All right. Thanks for the introduction, Don. I'm Alex Nitkin. I'm editor of the Daily Line. I'm here with Erin Hegarty, City Hall reporter. What's going on, Erin?
Not much. Just happy to be here on a Friday.
Yes, and with a map to look at, finally. And we are very excited. We have special guest of WBEZ, politics and City Hall reporter, Mariah Woelfel. Welcome, Mariah.
Hey, thanks. Super excited to be here.
Yes. So let's jump right into it. We're going to spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes talking in the little beginning about the process, go through the agenda here, just sort of the timeline of what has happened this year and what comes next. Then specifically what happened this week. It's been a really eventful, tumultuous week, and in some ways maybe not as eventful as we thought it was going to be. We'll get into that. A really big question that we're hearing a lot of people ask about, and we want to answer as well as possible. How does a referendum work? What is the referendum? Is a referendum a foregone conclusion? What is December 1st? Does it really matter? Has everyone been lying to us this whole time? And then we're going to spend a lot of time breaking down the city map. And we know we basically have two competing maps at this point, the Latino Caucus Coalition map and the Rules Committee so-called city map. But we really want to spend more time digging into the city map because it's so new, fresh, we're still digesting it, just to understand what it means, and with the caveat that it is by no means final. There are probably going to be a lot of changes, a lot of negotiations ahead, but the city map is a very important just sort of signal of what the majority of the city council wants to do. About 2/3 of the city council we know is pretty much behind it. So we'll be talking about that. And then around 12:45, we have a super secret special guest who is going to be joining us, and this is a press box first. Someone who is knowledgeable, been involved in the remap process, who is going to answer some of our questions and hopefully make us a little bit smarter about this whole thing. So let's jump
Hey,
into
real
it.
quick, Alex, before you do
yes.
that, speaking of questions, if anybody does have any questions or comments throughout the call, please find the chat box in your nav bar and drop us a line. We'd love to hear what you're thinking and if, answer your questions. If we can do it while we're in conversation, great. Otherwise, we'll try to hold some time at the end to get to your questions. All right, sorry about that, Alex. Go for it.
No, absolutely. We are going to have a little bit of time for general Q&A at the end, but also in the little text box, anyone who has any questions whatsoever during, you can throw them at us. We'll try to field them as we go. We know that there are a lot of questions and a lot of confusion about this. We want to try and answer as many as possible. So this really goes back to the beginning of this year is when I think we're going to start our story, when everyone was realizing this is going to be, remap is going to really dominate the city council for a good part of this year. And that started in some ways with this resolution that was filed by two aldermen that Erin was covering at the time.
Yeah, so this was way back, I think it was January or February, 2nd Ward Alderman Brian Hopkins and 40th Ward Alderman Andre Vasquez filed a measure to hold a hearing on what, an independent mapping process could look like. And Brian Hopkins has been pretty, I don't know, I've talked to him a lot, and he is a huge proponent of having a truly independent mapping process, so much that, he'd like to see a computer do this instead of aldermen or anyone who has any stake in ward boundaries. But that resolution kind of sat in Rules Committee for several months. Talking to him, he said that, Michelle Harris, who chairs the Rules Committee, said, she'd hold a hearing on this. But a hearing wasn't scheduled until, I think it was like the end of budget season, but it was quickly canceled. There was a health issue with someone who was going to present, and kind of asked him like, hey, what, it sat in Rules Committee for so long. What's the point of holding a hearing on a new mapping strategy when maps are already being drawn? And I guess now he's kind of looking forward to 10 years from now, saying, now is the time to figure out how we're going to draw a ward map in 2030, 2031. I don't know if that's wishful thinking. I mean, if you can't start a year before the process, then I guess maybe 10 years is a good time to start looking at how to potentially draw a new map. But yeah, that hasn't gone really anywhere. The truly independent mapping resolution.
An independent commission has cropped up, but that is not quite the same thing. It's not at all the same thing, and we're going to be talking more about that. But it is, I think, really indicative of just how any political will that was out there for an independent commission to draw the map sort of evaporated right at the beginning. We know that this was a campaign promise that Mayor Lightfoot had said that she wanted lines to be drawn by an independent commission. It's also notable, we should point out, that the Alderman Hopkins, who Erin was talking about, who's proposed this, is from the most famously gerrymandered ward in the city, the 2nd ward that is right there, that lobster, if you can see my laser pointing there, lobster / man on a bicycle shaped ward. So it really just never went anywhere, and here we are, aldermen drawing their own ward, same as ever, and we're going to be talking about all the implications of that and what that means for the map. So the next step really here was in August, we got the detailed block by block census data that came out. Mariah, what did that data show us and sort of indicate about what was going to happen in the mapping process?
Yeah, so the big headline, I think, out of the census data was that Chicago's Latino population had surpassed Chicago's Black population as the 2nd largest, racial ethnic group in the city. And so that kind of immediately signaled that there was going to potentially be this fight between the two caucuses for political power, where the Latino caucus is saying, we're now 30% of the population. We should have 30% of the city council seats. The Black caucus needs to shrink, its number of majority Black wards in the city. And so you kind of saw those lines drawn in the sand once that census data was released, with the Black caucus saying that they didn't want to give up any of their, 18 majority Black wards. But another huge headline was Chicago's Asian population had surged 31%. I mean, it's the Asian population is still just 7% of the city, but that really emboldened people within Chicago's Asian American advocate community to kind of say, okay, this will be the decade then for us to finally create a majority Asian ward where the Asian community can have the power to elect a representative of its choice to the city council, which does not have, a single Asian alderman at the moment. And also the city has never had a majority Asian ward. And so I think those were kind of the big headlines out of that census data release. But correct me if I'm missing any other major points.
No, I think that was really it. It was that we see these this map from Frank Calabrese here, sort of mapped it out. You can see there was this very rapidly growing Asian population here in the near south side, especially like you were saying, Mariah. Big population growing in and around town. Big population losses in the far south side. And yeah, that was really a catalyst to a lot of the, Asian American interest groups really putting momentum behind this movement, saying it's time, we need a majority Asian ward. So the Rules Committee.
Go ahead. The Latino population, grew 5%. And as you said, a lot of population loss on the south side, which the African American population saw a 10% decrease in population.
Yes, which really threw into a lot of the dynamics that have led to a lot of the conflict that we're seeing between the Black Caucus and Latino Caucus. So, Rules Committee holds its first remap hearing in September. Nothing super substantial came out of that. October, a group of good government groups and other sort of just general interests, particularly Change Illinois was a big one of this. Reform for Illinois came out and said, well, the mayor and the city council have not really kept their at least the mayor's campaign promised to direct this process through an independent commission. And so we're just going to do it ourselves and hope some aldermen come along the way, right? So Mariah, tell us about the so-called People's Map, the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission, and what they put out in October.
Yeah, so like you said, it's backed by Change Illinois. I think they held like nearly 50 meetings, throughout the summer and fall. I think starting even back to the spring with residents taking their input. They allowed residents to draw maps. They, met with groups on the ground in different neighborhoods to see what they wanted their map to look like. They did not take, they're proud of the fact that they did not take into account, protecting incumbent aldermen. I think they really focused on, like they say, keeping communities together. And then they released this map in October that would create, it would create that majority Asian ward. It would create 14, I believe, majority Latino wards and 15 majority Black wards. It hasn't gotten much traction. I think they were hopeful that they were hoping that they could convince 10 aldermen to sign on to it and push for a referendum, which we'll talk about the process of that later. But it hasn't so far gotten any firm public support from aldermen. That even though the independent commission did introduce it into city council, I don't think it has the support to kind of rescue it from the Rules Committee and get it on a potential ballot.
Right. This has always been the question that reporters have been bothering them with from the very beginning is, do you have any aldermen on board with this? Otherwise, it's pretty much just, a symbolic exercise. It's really not going to go anywhere. Interestingly, this past week, we got, as far as we know, the first ever alderman to publicly announce their support, or at least non-opposition to the People's Map, and it was Marty Quinn. Marty Quinn, through a statement, of the Southwest side, close ties to Mike Madigan, saying, yeah, I have no problem with it. So didn't necessarily expect that, but really, I don't think, as far as we know, he's a sponsor on that officially. So it's really I
would describe it more as non-opposition, his statement. He was like, my ward looks good.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily,
but he's not going to rally my colleagues for a referendum for it. Yeah, I think is the
right.
So Erin, let's talk about, so in October, the Latino Caucus came out with its coalition map, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. Then last month, Erin, the Rules Committee, they had said for a while previously that they were going to start holding open hearings on this. What did that end up looking like?
Yeah, so I was kind of bugging Rules Committee Chair Michelle Harris for a while about these meetings that she said she was going to hold. And initially I was under the impression that they were going to be like in person. I don't know, I just pictured some like massive, everyone in a gym yelling about their wards. But they were all virtual. And they started off very, very tame and short. And there wasn't, I mean, when these hearings started, you didn't really have much to look at. I mean, you had the Latino Caucus map to look at, and initially the hearings weren't even on. You didn't even get a presentation on the Latino Caucus hearing, and I think that bugged some, leaders of the Latino Caucus and supporters of their coalition map. But largely, it was just members of the public calling in, saying, what they wanted a map to look like. A lot of callers were from Greater Chinatown, advocating for an Asian American majority ward, and it also included a very brief and very basic presentation on what a remap is and what definitions of contiguous and compact wards from Michael Casper, who's the attorney working on the Rules Committee map. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's helpful.
Michael Casper, let's just pause to clarify, is like the longtime election attorney of Mike Madigan and his allies, which is something that we have heard brought up, sometimes not in the most charitable way. This past week, the city map has been referred to as the Casper map. He's sort of the lead attorney, as we understand it, leading the city map process.
Yeah,
we also got a history lesson on gerrymandering in those committee meetings, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
a lot of definitions of the vocabulary around the remap.
Yeah. Which I was a little strange. We all recognized like 2.5 weeks before this big deadline to actually approve a new map. And here's Mike Casper saying, like, here's what the Voting Rights Act says. Here's the origin of the term gerrymander, giving us some like 18th century, American history. And I think that really was the first indication of, maybe this might go past December 1st. So December 1st comes. This is, we should clarify the significance of December 1st. This is the last day that 41 aldermen can come together to approve a map. Otherwise, at least 10 aldermen can come together and file for a referendum to officially put it to voters to choose between 2 or more versions of the map. So the date has passed, and we're going to talk about what that means. Let's get into this week. We were just talking about how this feels like about 6 months ago, but on Monday, we finally had a Rules Committee meeting where some of the substance of the disagreement between the Black Caucus and Latino Caucus kind of broke into the open. Mariah, you were watching that meeting. When did it start to become clear that it was going to be different, that things were changing in this process?
Oh, I think almost immediately. I mean, a weird thing happened where it was scheduled for 1 p.m. and they started the meeting and then they weren't live streaming. And so they had to figure out technical difficulties. So at like 1:05, they were like, let's just recess until 1:30. So that was a little bit weird because I didn't think it would take like 25 minutes. And I was watching it. So it was live streaming on one platform. But they had to figure out some technical difficulties. So I think postponed, if I'm remembering correctly, like you said, it feels like 6 months ago, to 1:30. And then we heard from public commenters, and then they recessed for an hour. And so that was a little bit weird. You got an indication maybe they were still trying to figure out whether they were going to release a map, because the big expectation was that we would finally see the Rules Committee map at this meeting. Stuff went on behind the scenes, I'm guessing, between 2 and 3 p.m. And then we reconvene at 3 p.m. It's clear that Michael Casper is not going to be presenting a map at that time. Although I feel like several aldermen were still under the impression that he had some like presentation to give, because they kept being like, let's just stop our questions. I think everyone was ready to kind of speak on the issue. And then, people were like, let's just let Mike Casper give his presentation. But that had like kind of already happened very briefly, and there wasn't any more meat behind the very basic like outline that I think he gave again. And then just accusations flying. I feel like there were, there was the Latino Caucus accusing the Rules Committee of holding this process behind closed doors. And I think like the main point of contention, like that whole argument was about the process of how this argument has played out in the past few months. So like the point of contention of the Latino Caucus releasing a full map in October really drew ire from the Rules Committee, which had, been saying, come work with us in the map room, like come join us and work on a collaborative draft. Don't just like release your map drawing everyone else's wards. And that's why you're not getting what you want at this point. Like if you have complaints, you should have been in the map room for the past few weeks. Meanwhile, Latino Caucus members are saying, well, you're gaslighting us, like literally that specific allegation from Alderman
Ramirez, I think said that.
Yeah. Who said, you're gaslighting us. We've been trying to work with you, and now you're saying because we took initiative and released our map after, hitting a wall with you guys that we're not going to get what we want. And that just played out from my view over and over again, that argument throughout the committee meeting. And then,
interesting
Go ahead,
that
Erin.
meeting too, because you had aldermen who don't always speak up or get kind of involved in these kind of yelling matches. Like Susan Sedlowski Garza in the 10th ward was saying, she's been, she was in the map room to begin with. She's been in the map room and she drew her map, and that's the first time I think we heard her say that her ward doesn't look like the way she drew it. And she was pretty, I don't know, she sounded pretty, enraged to me.
That was surprising
because
to me.
Michelle
too.
Harris is saying like, just get in the map room, draw this, and aldermen are firing back and saying we were in there, but now our wards don't look like the way we drew them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting to remember, Sue Garza usually a very close ally of the mayor, and that's why I think we don't often see her as being sort of a rabble rouser, sort of at least in the city council context, but she's definitely someone who, if she has an opinion about something, she's going to make it very clear and very plain, and I think that's exactly what she did. It's also very important to remember she is a member of the Latino Caucus. She's a sponsor of the coalition map, and let's just set this up a little bit. And when you were talking about the process, a lot of it really breaks down, I think, between the Latino Caucus comes out and releases its coalition map out for the public, and this is back in, I think, late October, this was, their line of thinking and reasoning was, we're going to put it all above board, we're going to go out in the open, this is our starting negotiation point, and we will go from there, and that it should all be sort of transparent and out in the open. Whereas this city map, we've been waiting, and most aldermen had not even seen in full until just this week. And the Latino Caucus has been saying, well, that's what made them mistrustful. It seems sort of shady. It was all behind the scenes. We want something to be able to show people. But then from the standpoint of Chairman Michelle Harris, who's running functionally the Rules Committee process, is saying, well, no, this is the process. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're all supposed to be working together. We're supposed to be collaborating. And she really viewed that. And I think this really came out directly in the statement that she gave late yesterday. She viewed this going public with the coalition map as really undermining that, as you're trying to extricate yourself from this official process that we've all decided on. And the Rules Committee people are saying, well, that's bad faith if you are then if you're then going to go about your own process. So we already have a question. Thank you all for, from David Doig. Does seniority play into which aldermen get priority in drawing their maps? I think that we have seen that, bear out in certain ways. I think that we can talk about that a little bit later when we go into specifics, but we heard members of the Latino Caucus sort of complaining about how there are certain sacred cow wards that, Mike Casper and the Rules Committee have been saying, no, you can't touch those. I think that's something that has made the Latino Caucus really suspicious of this process, how they go in, are very consciously only allowed to look at and sort of touch their own ward and its surroundings. And this is something that Michelle Harris has said, this is really just something for you to work out with your colleagues around you, and don't have to worry about the city map. But when aldermen are told by Casper, or whoever's in this process, no, you can't move your ward there, that's locked in, they will then get suspicious. Well, then who are you trying to protect? And I think that that's really the heart of what Alderman Garza was talking about, when specifically she said she was told she couldn't push north, she could only push west. And apparently she was originally they had wanted her to go into Pullman, which is in the 9th Ward.
And I think getting to the
yeah.
question, I think aldermen, I feel like aldermen who are high in seniority definitely believe that seniority plays a role in drawing a map, because in the Latino Caucus coalition map, taking, Cabrini Green away from Walter Burnett, for example, I talked to him about that, and he pointed out, one of the first things he said was like, I'm third in seniority. Like, you don't do that to me. So I think the answer is like, yes, but should it play a role in how ward boundaries are drawn too?
Yes, definitely. I think we saw this play out with the 14th Ward and what happens to Ed Burke, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. But yeah, that's something that I think Walter Burnett can always be sort of trusted to just put it out there and say exactly what he's feeling about that kind of thing. And, Cabrini Green is where he grew up. It's sort of where his political upbringing and base is from with Jesse White. So he definitely would not want to give that up. Let's just finish this up. When, Tuesday, we thought a map was going to come out. A map didn't come out. It seemed, our understanding of the process is that the folks running the rules committee process thought that they would still be able to maybe push the rules committee map through, that they could get enough, peel off enough Latino caucus members to make that happen. And it just didn't. The coalition map group, the Latino caucus plus friends, stuck together. And so now it became clear, I think this is the moment on Tuesday, it became clear when this rules committee meeting was canceled, oh, we're not going to make this December 1st deadline. This is going to go a while. So Mariah, you were at City Council on Wednesday. We were all there. You guys were in the council chamber. You can see here, another turning point on Tuesday. Mayor Lightfoot says, by the way, I'm going to DC. Goodbye. Good luck on all this. That's not what she said, but she's leaving. Wednesday, City Council President Pro Tempore Brendan Riley steps in to preside over the meeting in Lightfoot's absence. What was this meeting? What happened?
So so it was a special city council meeting. The mayor did not attend, which I feel like is pretty rare. You guys would know better than me how unprecedented it is for the mayor to preside over a city council, to not preside over a city council meeting, especially with like a major news story like this. Although she said later, I would have rather been in DC to advocate for federal dollars coming back to Chicago than to preside over a city council meeting where just a map gets introduced, which is exactly what happened. It became clear, earlier Wednesday morning that it was very unlikely they were going to try to introduce a map and then force a vote on it in the same day. So we had, 30 minutes of public comments from kind of the same people we'd been hearing from in meetings, advocating for the specific wants from their communities. And then were there printing issues? Did I hear that correctly?
We had
a little bit of a recess.
So yeah, it started and Chairman Rules Committee Chair Michelle Harris, she was there apparently in City Hall, but she wasn't in chambers because she was in the map room trying to print the map that I had heard there were printing issues. So
okay,
that's not surprising to me.
I find that just funny because we've been waiting so long for this map, and of course the printer's not working on the day that we're all going to get like a very hard to read paper copy of the map. It's introduced pretty quickly. There's no presentation. There's no, these are how the wards break down. These are the benefits. These are, kind of the compromises we made. Nothing like that, which I thought would have been beneficial, but it happened very quickly, less than 15 minutes. And then that's when it really became clear that this was going to extend into next year, with Michelle Harris saying, we're going to sit down, we're going to hold 2 public hearings next week. We're going to break for the holidays in mid-December, and then come back with a series of public hearings in January, all the while trying to negotiate, behind closed doors to come up with 41 votes.
Yeah, I feel like this was the pivotal moment of Wednesday, is when we're all waiting. We don't know what's going on. Michelle Harris is running this whole show, is conspicuously absent. She shows up and then she says, I'm here to propose this map. This is just a starting point. We're going to be holding hearings in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah.
And then we all looked at each other. I was in the press room. We're like, did she say months? it was like
Yeah.
a record scratch kind of moment. And that's when it
Yeah.
became clear, like, this is really just starting.
Yeah.
So yesterday, December 2nd, is the first day under city rules that 10 aldermen can come together and file for a referendum. And that is exactly what happened. As we can see here, the city council, or the city council Latino caucus, plus some of their allies in this, Brian Hopkins and Anthony Beal, walked into the clerk's office. They filed officially for a referendum. There were 15 of them behind this, which is 5 more than is needed. Erin, what happens now? Is there going to be election tomorrow, next week?
Well, there's no election tomorrow or next week, thankfully, that I know of. And so yeah, the reason, like you said, the reason they were able to file that, the Latino caucus was able to file that petition for a referendum, was because the city council, I mean, obviously they didn't vote on a map, so they didn't approve a map with at least 41 votes. They are the, Latino caucus and friends are the first to file a petition for a referendum question. And so that means if this does make, voters are choosing a ward map in June, which is when the Illinois primary is, that the Latino caucus map will be first on the ballot, which a lot of people have pointed out is it's beneficial to be first on a ballot, especially when it's, kind of a confusing topic, such as a ward remap, because voters might just pick, okay, I have to vote for this thing. I'm just going to go with the first, thing I see first choice I see on the list. Except there's a lot of time between now and June. And so we don't actually even know if this map is going to go to a referendum, because aldermen basically have between now and 40 days out of the June election to come to
May 19th. Next
May?
big day. May 19th.
There we go. Yes, May 19th, to come to an agreement on a map and pass an ordinance with at least 41 supporters. And something that's interesting is the last time voters approved a ward map in a referendum was 1992. And I talked to, the Chicago Board of Elections, and the spokesperson there said, that was kind of concerning because there was nothing that went along with those maps. There was no picture of the map. There's no visual aid for voters to, look at in deciding what map they were choosing. It was just a name attached to a map. And I think that can, it can be confusing if you've not been following, the ward remap process for, by the time we get to June, a year and a half, basically. So will it go to a referendum? Who knows? Will there be multiple maps if it does go to a referendum? Possibly. But another important thing is, aldermen can't support more than one. They can't put their name on more than one map in this case. So,
it's true as well that it's not like if there is a referendum called that any map proposal that's on the books automatically goes to that referendum, right? Like the people's map, which has been introduced to city council, would not automatically go to that referendum unless it had 10 aldermen, is my understanding of it as well.
That's right. They would need 10 aldermen to get on the ballot. Yeah, so this is basically what we're looking at. The clock is ticking, the fuse is officially lit. We have until May 19th for 41 aldermen to come together. Otherwise, a referendum will be on your primary ballot question on June 28th. This is something that aldermen have really, it sounds like they dread, they want to avoid at all costs, just how messy, expensive it would be, hard to campaign for, hard to educate voters about. Of course, you could just be cynical or realistic and say they don't want to leave this in anyone else's hands. They want total control over it. One more idealistic way to put it that Alderman Matt Martin told me this week was, well, we want to be able to focus our full attention on our jobs in government and not to be fussing with campaigning for a referendum. So that's another way to look at it. So that is the situation with that. I think we should maybe pause now to look at what would likely be the two separate options or some version of this versus this map. And really, the crux of the difference here is how many majority Black wards versus how many majority Latino wards, right? The Latino caucus comes out and says, we are 30+% of the population. We need 15 majority Latino wards. That is the hard line. They have not budged on that. And so they would achieve that by changing some of the northwest side Latino wards to sort of expand their Latino populations, in part by turning the, let's see, is this, I think, yep, this is 33 right here. By the 33rd ward, represented by Rosanna Rodriguez Sanchez, right now does not have any majority ward, or does not have any majority racial group. It would, under the Latino caucus proposal, become majority Latino. But the bigger move that they would make is that they would turn the 17th ward, which currently looks a little bit more like this. It's sort of Auburn Gresham stretching into Ashburn Market Park, currently represented by David Moore. They would move that west, where they said the Latino population has been growing the most rapidly. It would become the newest majority Latino ward. This is, of course, totally unacceptable to the Black caucus, which says we need at minimum, first they said 18 majority Black wards. Now they've sort of brought it back down to 17. There are currently 17 because the 27th ward is plurality Black, but not majority Black. And under there, the Black caucus proposal, or sort of the city map proposal, is what the Black caucus is on board with. They would have 17 or 16 majority Black districts and one what they call Black influence district, which would be 27, here represented by Walter Burnett. And so, but of course that leaves 14 majority Latino districts, which is unacceptable to the Latino caucus. So that is sort of the crux of the disagreement that we're left with here. So let's dive into the details here. This is what we've been excited about this whole time. So one thing that we wanted to look at straight out was Chinatown. We were talking earlier about how, let me actually jump back right now and answer. David Doig also asked, will there likely be constitutional challenges to the maps? We really don't know. The question, people are generally kind of saying, well, it seems like it's headed in that direction. Maybe it's inevitable. We'll see. Jason Irvin, chair of the Black Caucus, has certainly not been shy about the fact that they are willing to go there. They're willing to go to the courts if there is any challenge against, taking away a majority Black ward. So under the new Rules Committee map, it would satisfy, actually both the Rules Committee map and the Latino Caucus map would create someone has to have access to a pointer. I have this laser pointer thing. Hopefully it works. Hopefully you guys can see it. Both of the maps give the 11th ward a majority Asian population. The Rules Committee map does this by, someone says not working. You see it? Okay. I'll just try to use this laser pointer, and if I'll just also try to describe it as best as I can. So the 11th,
as there might be a little bit of a delay for
sure, that makes sense. Okay. So the 11th ward currently is like 41% Asian, in part because Chinatown is split between the 25th ward here and the 25th ward on the sort of right-hand arm of the green map on the side. Let's try a marker. Are you guys seeing that illustration? If someone can comment and see if they tell me if they see that. We're not seeing anything.
Too bad we haven't assigned shapes. This is the
okay.
animal ward.
Yeah.
All wards that we're all familiar with.
Let's try and just shoot. I have a laser pointer function here, and we're seeing it, but I guess folks aren't seeing it, so I'm just going to try to describe it as best I can. The 11th ward, which is the on the left-hand map, the sort of light blue ward that has the thing that juts up onto the Dan Ryan, that's not majority Asian. It would become majority Asian under the right-hand map, the city map, which is that pink 11. It would subsume all of Chinatown. And that is also what Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson, who continues to represent the 11th ward, wanted, was to take over Chinatown, give up his parts in Pilsen, and then just keep Chinatown, Bridgeport, Armour Square, and Canaryville together. Keep neighbors together. That would make it about 48% Asian. But the city map brings that up just past 50% by adding in a little bit of McKinley Park. If you see that bulge to the west of 11 there, where Asian population has really been growing rapidly. And then by giving up the southeast corner, you see how it's kind of cut up. That's Canaryville, which is mostly white. That would be cut off. And that is how the city map gets it to, that's how the city map gets to majority Asian. Patrick Daley Thompson says that's not acceptable. He's against that because it would divide neighborhoods, which sort of brings up this question of, is it worth breaking up neighborhoods to unite a racial group? Yeah, I mean, Mariah, what has the Asian American, constituency groups, what has been their response to that as far as you've heard it? I mean, what's their argument for having majority Asian ward?
Oh, well, I mean, currently it's split between, I think, 3 different wards, and that makes it hard for, Chinese Americans and Chinese residents to advocate for services like language access, or I think a specific issue is they've been trying to advocate for a new school in their neighborhood, and that's been difficult. But we should note that the city map would create just a sliver of a majority ward. Like it's like 50.03%. And so I think the groups have said, that is a majority Asian ward. It might not be as secure as, I think the Latino Caucus map is a 51% majority Asian ward, if I'm remembering correctly, in their new iteration. But they told me that they'll be watching it very closely because any slight change could bring it down to below 50%.
Yeah, so Thompson's argument has been we want to keep neighborhoods together and not worry so much about the percentages. He has taken this sort of like colorblind tone of, mapping based on race is racism, which that's sort of what is dictated under the Voting Rights Act. We have to map based on race to some extent to, enfranchise minority groups. And he said, we want to just keep communities together. And Justin Sia, the attorney for the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, has said, yeah, that's our whole point. We want to keep communities together. We want to keep the Chinese American community together. And yeah, like Bridgeporters are maybe a cohesive group, but Bridgeporters don't speak a separate language that needs specific services. They don't have, immigration legal needs.
Right. And they, under the Voting Rights Act, I mean, I think that the qualification is a group that has been historically discriminated against and disenfranchised. And I think that's what makes the Asian American community a protected class under the Voting Rights Act.
Let me try something. If I click and draw like that, can you guys see that? Can someone comment yes or no? Which is zigzags on the laser pointer? No, still no. Okay, it's going to keep describing.
I'm looking at team support, and it doesn't look like we can do it in presenting a PowerPoint, only when you're displaying your desktop. So we're not going to have that functionality today. Sorry, folks. But
right, I'm going to do my best to describe. So Amy says, how is it that Ward 2 is perhaps now even worse? Ward 2 is the, you can see on the left-hand side, the color contrast is not as good as these, but it is sort of the crab/man on bicycle one that starts in where it says near north side. Is the sort of front wheel, and then it's got the top that includes Lincoln Yards, the sort of man, and then the back wheel is sort of dips down into Ukrainian Village. Crucially, in the city map, it keeps most of that ward, except it just lops off the entire western appendage. This in Ukrainian Village gets absorbed by the first ward. We haven't even talked about this Lincoln Yards, which is right in the sort of toe of that green, Minnesota-shaped ward on the right-hand side. That would be the 32nd ward, Scott Waguespack's ward. He wants Lincoln Yards. He would get it under this draft city map. He would not get it under the Latino Caucus ward, map, which is relevant because Hopkins is a supporter of the Latino Caucus ward map. So it would keep Hopkins' political base in Streeterville, Gold Coast, and it would both of them, the Latino Caucus map and the Rules Committee map, sort of reach up into. Also, I'm on slide 8. I was under the impression that as I move through the slides, everyone else is seeing what I'm on. But if you can move the slides yourself, then right now I'm on slide 8 out of 15, looking at the sort of downtown and its surroundings. you see that in the city map, there's a sort of bulge right on the top that it goes into sort of Sheffield neighbors, West Lincoln Park area. That is where Hopkins lives, so he would still be able to run there. So we want to bring on our guest in a second. Yeah.
I feel like if we're gonna assign like a shape to the second ward proposed under the rules committee map, I think it looks like a very thin T-Rex who might be running with the head, up in Sheffield, Sheffield area. So
yeah,
I'm laying claim to that evaluation.
Credit to the Block Club had a great story yesterday asking people to sort of ink blot interpret what they think the wards look like. I'm already having fun with that. So we have our guest who's going to come on in a little bit, but first let's just run through a couple other areas, sort of sticking points of note. We're going to get a new 34th ward. That's pretty much no matter what. The Latino Caucus has proposed it on the near north side and covering Goose Island. The city map, I have come, looking at this, it really is hard to come to any other conclusion than it gives 34 all of the parts of downtown that other aldermen did not want. It seems like sort of the leftovers. The reason why I say that is because it doesn't have Fulton Market, Randolph and Fulton here. It doesn't have that sort of like cut down the middle is Halstead Street, sort of like the main drag of Greektown, stays in Walter Burnett's ward. The Tribune printing site is sort of just north of this little hat on top of 34 that stays with Burnett. It goes, the 34th ward here would stretch into the loop, but notably the 42nd ward, Brendan Riley would keep, if he's reelected, would keep the Thompson Center and Daly Plaza and Daly Center and City Hall. Those would all barely stay in that little indent on the right side, as would Willis Tower, Sears Tower, whatever you want to call it, and its surroundings would stay in the 42nd ward. Whitney Young would stay in the 27th ward. That's the little divot on the far right side, left side. The old post office complex would go into the 28th ward. They couldn't even give the 34th ward like Manny's Deli. That's down here with the Portillos. But 34th ward,
the best of all of them, in my opinion.
Yeah. 34th ward will get the Jane Byrne interchange so that they can be responsible for alerting their constituents to all of the construction every week. So at least they got that going for them. Any other quick?
It allows Burnett to keep Cabrini Green too, right?
That's true.
In the coalition map, yeah, that would fall under the 34th ward.
Yeah, so Burnett would give up the sort of West Loop Gate area between the river and the Kennedy, and it would keep Cabrini Green and parts of Old Town in his ward. I'm going to move on because we're running a little short on time. The southwest side, as far as we know, the Rules Committee had been working on a map that would politically advantage Ed Burke. Word came down from the mayor that would not fly, and so we saw this new 14th ward where Ed Burke lives. You see how 14 has this sort of finger sticking way up into Archer Heights. Ed Burke lives right at the tippy top of that little finger. He lives in the northwest corner of it, so that would become more Latino, would probably be harder for him to run in. It doesn't have that stripe on the top of Garfield Ridge that was baked into Burke's ward the last time. And so I'm just going to keep moving on. Okay, northwest side, there were a couple pretty interesting things where the 45th ward, which is in yellow on the right and in that sort of like ocean green on the left, it would get Wildwood, which is the sort of right-hand appendage. It would get Wildwood, sort of making it more conservative. This seems like a tailor-made map for Jim Gardner, who represents it now, in part because this sort of like sideways middle finger of 38, the orange one, sticking way out to the east, that's just far enough to consume the home of John Arena, who is the previous 45th Ward Alderman. And it would also, where you see there's a little cliff on 30 on the right-hand map, that cliff is just in enough to eliminate Megan Mathias, who is the only declared candidate in the race so far. And more critically than that, I think, is that it would cut off the most liberal parts, the most arena heavily supporting parts of the 45th Ward, which are around Independence Park and Old Irving Park, where he performed the best. Oh, and also the city map would carve out, if you see the 30th Ward has a little slice, that is where Jessica Gutierrez lives. She's the daughter of Luis Gutierrez, who ran against Reboires, Alderman Ariel Reboires in the 30th Ward, and almost unseated him. So, you know, Reboires is a supporter of the Latino Caucus coalition map, which does keep Gutierrez in his ward, interestingly. Gutierrez thinks that Reboires still has some part to play in her being cut out. We'll have to hear from him on that. And then, yeah, the big one on the North Lakefront is, you can see on the right-hand side, the 40th Ward cuts deep into the West Ridge neighborhood, into the 50th Ward, just far enough to get Hallie Quesada's home. She ran against Deborah Silverstein, 50th Ward, for committee person last year, says that she will do it again. Interestingly, it gets there just far enough to get to her home, but you can see there's a little sort of slit right there in the 40th Ward, and that is where the West Ridge Library branch is that would stay in the 50th Ward. That is on Hallie Quesada's block. It would stay in 50, she would go into 40. Maybe a coincidence, who knows? So then I think that, is there anything else? Yes, this is in the 10th Ward, what Alderman Garza had opposed was this little nub of the 10th Ward on the on the right-hand map that would stick into Altgeld Gardens. She's very opposed to that. She says that, she said at this press conference the other day that folks who live in that ward, or who live in that slip of Altgeld Gardens, would be miles and miles away from her ward office. They wouldn't be able to access services. So real quick, yes.
Oh, go ahead. I think in the comments, someone pointed out something on the far south side, just that in both the Latino Caucus map and the Rules Committee map, Englewood still remains divided between 3+ wards. And that's, I think that's been a little bit of a flashpoint. And when you talk about keeping communities together, is the greater Englewood neighborhood is very split up and has to advocate to 3, 4, 5 different aldermen at sometimes. The People's Map, I think that, the Independent Advisory Commission groups that entire area into one, but it seems as though based on the Latino Caucus map, which isn't up in this region, but even you can see in the Rules Committee map, the green, pink areas of the map. I just think it's worth noting that is like still an issue, regardless of what map you vote for. If this does go to a referendum, that still remains to be an issue.
Englewood has been really divided. We know that, RAISE, the resident association group of Englewood, has been really advocating for consolidation. It doesn't look like that would quite happen in the city map. We want to make sure that we get to our guests to respect their time. Don, can you bring them in?
Yeah, he is all set. Welcome, Burt.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Burt Odelson is the lead attorney, if that's an appropriate way to describe you, for the Latino Caucus in the remap. Welcome. Sorry for the delay in getting to you. Thanks for being on. Can you just tell us a little bit about your role in all this business?
I wouldn't consider myself the lead attorney. Victor Reyes is probably the lead attorney, along with myself and Homero as the attorneys. Frank Calabrese, who's also on, was our mapper, who it's funny to hear you describing his map because he could really explain it since he's been through this with us since the end of August. I think Don knows. I told Don I was the attorney for the Black Caucus 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and was involved in the litigation that resulted from the 1990 map, where we had the referendum. So I have a little background on what has happened and what's going on right now, and what we did as the Latino Caucus, which has blossomed into the coalition map. And if I can just say briefly, we started the end of August doing the maps. The map room was my office and Victor Reyes's office. Frank was the mapper. We mapped for 35 aldermen between the end of August and the end of November. We put together the maps that complied with the equal population requirement and complied with giving the minority class a ward where they can elect one of their own, and then tried to keep communities together in order to comply with the compact and contiguous requirement of the law. But number one, we have to make sure that we drew maps where a minority could be elected. And that doesn't mean 50% or 49% in most cases. It means quite a bit more. So in doing that, I can tell you 10 years ago, the African American caucus should have lost 3 wards because of the substantial decrease in population. We were able to do it the old-fashioned way in the back room when we had leadership from the top, and they only lost 1 ward. This time, they definitely need to go from 18 to 16. Jason Irvin has said from day one he wasn't budging off 18. Then they filed this thing yesterday and shows that there's 16 African American wards. However, they're really not good African American wards because they did something called cracking, which means they've taken Latinos and separated them and put them into wards 16, 18, 20, in order to increase the minority population in those wards, which takes a whole ward away from the Latino population, which will lead to litigation. So that's something you all haven't talked about here, but that's a very, very important factor that we have looked at through this process in attempting to draft a coalition map which avoids a referendum and avoids litigation. Mostly litigation. Referendum, then let the people decide as long as we can educate them. And you talked a lot about how tough it is when it's on the ballot, and that is incredibly true because the picture of the ballot is not a very nice picture. It's a little bit better than the crayon type thing map that they released yesterday, but not much better. There's no map on the ballot. All it's listed are the sponsors, the aldermanic sponsors of each map. So people really don't see a map. They don't see a map. They look at who they know and vote for who they know as far as the sponsors go. And so I don't want to get there, but I think that's where we're going.
Burt,
I definitely want to ask you more, sorry, about the litigation and the legal aspect of this, but I just want to pause and back up to something you said, that 10 years ago, the Black Caucus should have lost more wards. It was only because they had such great legal counsel, which was you, that they were able to circumvent the system and get more than they deserved. Is that sort of...
No, just one of the reasons, and there's a big difference this time than ever before. The mayor's always got involved before. Under the map that we did under Daley and the map we did under Emanuel, there was direction from the top to their floor leaders. Last time it was Burke, Mel, and O'Connor. And Victor and I sat down in the same room at the end, and we divided it up as best we could in order to get to 41 votes. And the African American caucus benefited, and the numbers bear that out. Since 1990, we've lost 285,000 African Americans from the city and gained 275,000 Latinos. Well, it speaks right for itself. The numbers are the numbers. But politically, we were able to salvage two black wards 10 years ago. This time, its numbers aren't there, and that will lead to litigation if the city passes this map and tries to force this map down the throats of the Latinos and the city of Chicago.
Yeah, I would definitely like to talk more about that possibility. Number one, just how likely I guess it is, and I think David Doig here in the chat framed it pretty well. Will you commit now to challenge the constitutionality of any map other than the coalition map, or how open is that?
I challenge this map, and I don't know what the city's final map will be, but we challenge this map. I mean, I have no problem with that. We've only had a couple hours to actually analyze it. Like I said, I held up I call it the crayon map, which they released yesterday. We just finally got the numbers. Frank crunched the numbers for us, so I know where we're at. And yes, it's very challengeable. Will we challenge any map? No. it has to be legally challengeable. Will we go to referendum? Yes, that's why we filed.
So it's obviously very early in this, and we're all still digesting the data. But can you give us some sense of the substance of your challenge? Can you sort of preview what your argument would be against the city map in court?
Yeah, very simple. They gave us 14 Latino wards. There has to be a minimum of 15. We could have drawn 16 Latino wards, but we wanted to make sure we gave each neighborhood and each ward a sufficient opportunity to elect a representative of their class. So that's why we came in with 15. Certainly not 14. It will never be 14, whether it's in the city council, in the referendum by the people, or in the courts. It will be 15.
Will that argue? Oh, go ahead, Erin.
Is there anywhere to move on the rules committee map to find that 15th ward?
Yes.
Where are there multiple options that you would look?
There's probably multiple options, not many, a few. The 17th is the best option because that's there's Latinos, there's condensed population there, and that's why we drafted it that way. There are options. So I think
that kind of answers my question, which was whether, if this goes to court, whether the argument will really focus around the 17th ward when you're talking about the difference between 14 and 15 majority Latino wards.
Yeah, right now that's where it would focus. We have some side issues, and I don't know if you saw Cranes and spoke to those folks in the last couple of days about how the city map moves big developments out of wards and into other favored wards. For instance, Hopkins's ward, taking Lincoln Yards out of his ward and putting it in Scott's. I mean, Scott voted against Lincoln Yards. Brian developed the whole Lincoln Yards concept. So that is a critical issue. It's not a legal issue, so to speak, but it would be in there for a kind of flavor.
Let me just jump in to also interject. You're talking about moving over developments. One thing that we didn't mention is that the city map would move the 78 area into the 3rd ward under Pat Dell. Chris asks, any other options besides 17?
Yeah.
And actually, let me, as sort of part of that, Jay Peters brings up an interesting idea that it's sort of been pointed out, and actually the People's Map did this. If you could, in theory, create 17 majority Black wards and 15 majority Latino wards, if you break up the 19th ward represented by Matt O'Shea into 2 majority Black wards, right? Is that an option, or what are there other ways to get to 17 or to 15?
Is that a physical option? Yes. Is it a practical reality? The answer is no. And the really interesting thing about the Rules Committee city map is that they took the wards that Frank drew for many of the white aldermen and a number of the Black aldermen, because we drew for 5 different Black aldermen, even though only Beal signed on with us. They took our map after they mapped with us, walked over to the city, gave them the map that we drew for them, and the city inserted it. So there's wards like 19, and that borders where my law offices are, and Matt O'Shea is a friend of mine, so I would never think about cutting up that ward, but his ward is the same in both maps. And there's a good number of wards that are the same in both maps, which relates to a political decision when it comes to a referendum. And that's a whole nother conversation that we don't have time to do here.
And
so
how
Frank
go ahead. The 35 aldermen that you drew, ward bounds for, how was that, like an open invitation, come work with us, or how did you accumulate, you said 5 members of the Black Caucus, even though only Beal signed on, but how did that group evolve, I guess?
Between our chairman, Gil Villegas, and Victor and myself, and a couple of other members of the Latino caucus, we reached out to our friends on the city council, opened our doors, and said, come map with us. There was nothing going on at the city until, I don't know, middle of September, maybe even later than that. They had nothing. We were up and running at the end of August. As soon as we had the preliminary figures, and then when the census numbers came out, We put it on our big board here and in Victor's office. Frank started drawing, and we literally met with 35 aldermen who came in. The only 15 that didn't were 15 from the Black Caucus. So we gave everybody the opportunity, and it worked out very well for them and for us, because we used what they basically wanted, not all of it, but basically what they wanted. That carried over to what they're calling the city map.
So Frank Calabrese has entered the chat. He is the cartographer for the Latino caucus you're working with. He notes that the Black Caucus doesn't want, and they've actually said this publicly, they don't want to split up the 19th ward. And, you know, you were talking about, you know, the alderman is a friend of yours. He's one of the more senior aldermen. He's been there since, 2011, I think. He's sort of well-liked. Someone asked, you know, earlier in the chat here, to what extent seniority matters and to what extent there are sort of like sacred cows based on, you know, so to speak, based on likability within the city council based on seniority that just can't be touched.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wanted to jump all over that when you were talking about it, but it wasn't allowed in under your
Jump
rule.
away.
So seniority used to be the #1 priority back in the day, back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You know, the aldermen came in, drew their map, how they wanted it. Less senior aldermen had to work around that. Not so this time, not with us. We certainly gave credence to what a senior alderman had to say about his or her ward, because they've lived it. They've been there. No, you can't break up this neighborhood because of this or that. So certainly we listened to them, but we followed the data and followed the law. And the law being the Voting Rights Act. We had to draw communities who, like the 11th Ward. We had to do that because the law required us to do that. Do we want to break up communities? No. What we look at it as is incorporating communities that should be incorporated together. So seniority didn't play as near a role as it has in the past. It was under consideration only to get the input of the aldermen who knew their neighborhoods and knew who they could serve the best and who their neighbor can serve the best. Because remember, it's all about service. That's what the people vote on when they vote on who can serve me the best.
So one last thing that I want to ask, and then I can leave it open for the rest of you guys, and we should probably wrap up here. You know, since this has come out, we have already found people have been jumping on at least 4 examples of people's political opponents being mapped out. Some like in the 43rd ward, where it's sort of like, well, it was just on the edges and it was sort of shrank and it's arguable. Others, I mean, like that 50th ward where it like carves a path right to Alex Nitkin's doorstep. It seems like people look at that and say, well, this is what happens when people are just allowed to draw their own boundaries, choose their own voters. Can you give an argument for why there shouldn't be an independent commission? Why should aldermen be, you know, allowed to just oversee this whole thing, especially, you know, in private conversations amongst themselves instead of in public?
Yeah, sure I can, because the law says that they're responsible to draw it. That's what the law says. Now, is there a room for an independent commission and help? Of course, but the independent commission has no flavor of service to the community, of cutting the trees down, of plowing the snow, of fixing the sidewalks. The aldermen who live it every day have a flavor for what their community needs and who's who. I'm not saying there's no place for an independent commission. And in fact, we already had our first meeting with Change Illinois. They came to us, said, we like your map. We want to sit down and talk to you. We've already opened the door and we've met, and we're going to keep meeting with Change Illinois to see if we can't incorporate maybe some of their changes into our map. So the law says it's the responsibility of the alderman to draw the map. That's why the mayor stepped away, and I gotta give her some credit here. She said, it's your job. It's not mine. I run citywide. Your job. You do it in compliance with the law. But you saw with the lack of leadership, what it resulted in.
That's some news then, as far as I know, that Change Illinois, the backer of the People's Map, is talking with the coalition.
It is news. Yes.
There's one last important point that I want to make. Don, do you want to go first?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I just was wanting to jump ahead to the referendum and get an understanding if there's any specific campaign finance laws or electioneering laws around this remap process that people need to be aware about? There's obviously going to be a huge educational task that needs to get underway in order to educate voters on what's going on in these maps. Can you kind of give some insight into what we can see there?
Sure. The rules are a bit different than in your typical political campaigns as far as the amount people can contribute. We've already opened our PAC. We're probably going to open another referendum PAC in order to gain contributions. There are no limits. It's very interesting, and it's all about education. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's all about educating the people of Chicago, just like you've done today with the comparison of the maps. People have to understand what they're voting on, and the way it works pursuant to law, they do not understand what they'll be voting on unless we educate them, what they're voting on. So it's all about getting the money to get the message out, sort of like a political campaign, but not as many rules as there are with candidates.
And
Again,
so
another whole conversation.
when people are saying this is, a referendum is expensive, it's going to be costly, I guess, can you elaborate a bit more on who it's costly to? It doesn't cost anything, right, to put a question on a ballot, but it's costly in that it costs money to educate people on what they're voting on. So who is it costly to, I guess, is my question.
It's costly to each side who wants to get their message out. If it's going to cost the Latino Caucus to put out the Chicago Coalition map. It's going to cost a lot of money to educate the people, to tell them why our map is legally and in every other way more sound than the city map or whatever map they come up with. It'll be interesting to see what the city does as far as them paying for any education. I'll be watching that closely, so they can be aware before you spend taxpayer dollars on electioneering. They better be very careful, and we're going to be very careful on our end that we don't spend tax dollars to campaign one way or the other. It'll have to be independent funds raised to educate.
What areas are you flexible about working on with the change with the People's Map in the Latino Caucus map? Are there any specific flashpoints that are coming up that we could see changes on? And do you then have to file a new petition for a referendum if your map changes? How does that work?
Yeah, if the map I'm not sure about the flexibility. I would yield to Frank on that, but I can tell you there are flexible points in the map. Not a lot, but some. And if a compromise map was met, it could pass city council. If a map passes the city council, it knocks the referendum question off the ballot, and we have to refile. So we could literally take that same map, knocked off the ballot because they had 35 votes. They passed the map, which they could have done yesterday. Would knock our referendum off the ballot, and then we just have to refile it. So unless they come to a compromise, you're going to see a referendum. And the referendum is not costly for the city. There's an election June 28th. It's one more thing on the ballot. That's it. So that's a misnomer about the cost of the election, not to the city.
So it seems like the Latino Caucus really is full throttle, absolutely prepared to jump into this referendum. They're not,
we're in it. We're in it. We've been gearing towards this since day one in anticipation that we could not get a map, a consensus together to get 41 or 34 votes. If we got that, we worked towards that. Great. If not, we were ready. Obviously, we filed at the first available opportunity yesterday morning.
Do we have time for another question? I just have a question, just given like all of the work that you've done in the past few decades on this process. Do you think that this year stands out as a particularly fraught year? And if so, is that partly because of the mayor's lack of involvement? And if so, is that good or bad? So a three-pronged question, but I just want your thoughts on how this year, stands out to you.
It's really a kind of a remarkable year based on everything I've done in the past during my legal career and in mapping, because you have actually two warring sides and a third side that is kind of playing the middle, and you know, that's the white aldermen, and you have the Latino and the black aldermen on the warring sides, and you have no supreme ruler, so to speak. And I'm not critical of the mayor for that. I've lived under the other mayors who said this is the way it's going to be. Now, alderman, you go out and get it done, and that's the way we did it, and they garnered the votes. This is a much more open process, which that's what we intended it to be. That's why we started the end of August. That's why we filed October 25th. We filed our map that was online. We wanted it to be an open process. We got input. We did it. And what happened? We once more, we got this jammed down our throat yesterday afternoon with no data because they didn't have it ready, because they didn't know what to do. Too bad. We're ready. There's the map. It's legal. And it complies with the Voting Rights Act. Everybody got what they should get under that map. So yeah, it's a different time, but it still may end up in court, and still may end up with a referendum.
All right. Well, we should wrap up, and I want to thank you so much, Burt, for your time and
Sure.
jumping on with us. Before we close, there's one really important legal point that I want to make. Some folks were starting to point this out yesterday with all of the talk of people barely being mapped out of their current wards. And people were pointing out that doesn't necessarily, and you can chime in here, Burt, but there are people pointed out that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't run again in the same ward.
Correct. Yeah.
And so I went, and it's taken me all of yesterday and this morning, but I managed to, I was making some calls and came across the actual paragraph in state law that pertains to this. I'm just going to read it. In the election following redistricting, a candidate for alderman may be elected from any ward containing a part in which he or she resided from at least 1 year preceding the election that follows the redistricting. And if election, that person may be reelected from the new ward he or she represents if he or she resides in that ward for at least 1 year preceding the reelection. In other words, if I am, say, John Arena, and I was in the 45th ward and now suddenly I'm in 38, not only am I allowed to run again in 2023 as the next 45th ward alderman, I could also run in the 30th ward because part of 45 ended up in 30, or maybe, the 39th ward. He could run in any of those wards. All he then has to do is move to that ward by 2026, which is a year before the next election.
That's absolutely correct. And I'm glad you brought it up, because that's a point that is ignored a lot, that this mapping out, it really doesn't mean much, because you can run and you got a couple of years to move in. We didn't do that. I think maybe we did in the 50th. I'm not sure, but when we drew the 50th, we added population to incorporate some more of the Jewish population into Deb's 50th ward. I think we may have helped her out a bit with her opponent, but it really doesn't help out because, as you said, they can run in the ward anyway. But the city map has a lot of that. They meticulously did that, which we didn't do.
And if you want to look up that paragraph in the Illinois code, that is 65 ILCS 20/21-14 parentheses A under the Municipalities Code, Revised Cities and Villages Act of 1941. Definitely a very important piece of context. It's still a barrier if you're going to make someone move just so they can run for re-election. I think, at least. So I want to thank everyone so much. Thank you, Burt. Thank you so much, Mariah, WBEZ, for joining us, and Erin and Don. This has been really great. Sorry, we went a little bit of overtime, but it was a great discussion. This will all be recorded. Like Don said later, it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. Yeah, Don, do you want to close us out?
No, thanks so much, Alex. Burt, Mariah, great to have you guys on. We look forward to talking to you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the day, guys. We've kept you long enough. Check out thedailyline.com and subscribe if you are not already a member, which I think most of you are already. So please share. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Alex.